So this is the second lecture, the last year revision series for corporate restructuring, both for old as well as the new syllabus. And today we will be starting with this chapter, chapter 15 of the Companies Act. From old syllabus point of view, this covers your chapter number 2. And for new syllabus, it covers multiple chapters from your module number 1. So in case you see, this is the new syllabus module. And in the new syllabus module, it is, I'll just take you to the main index and from there we can. So it is part of this chapter. Okay. That is section 235. Then part of this chapter. Then you have this chapter. Then you also have this chapter. Then you also have this chapter. So there are multiple chapters which are getting covered here. And as far as the old syllabus is concerned, you just have chapter number 2, which completely deals with the mergers and amalgamation. So we'll cover everything the way again I have taught you all using the same slide. So chapter 15 of the Companies Act, Compromise, Arrangement and Amalgamation, you read this with the rules, and it is rule compromise, arrangement and amalgamation rules. So the first and foremost section is section 230, where it is the power to compromise or to make arrangements with the creditor and the member. 231 is the power of the tribunal. Most important question from your exam point of view: what are the three powers which are available to the tribunal with respect to the compromise and arrangement? So that is the three powers which is given here. Then you have section 232, which deals with the merger and amalgamation and also demerger. And section 233 is the fast track merger. So in new syllabus, they have asked a lot of questions. Expect same sort of questions in your old syllabus also. Then you have mergers and amalgamation of a company with a foreign company. So rule 25A is something which you should know, and also the cross-border FEMA cross-border regulation. So that is to be there. And when it comes to section 230 and section 232, past judgments are again going to be very important and crucial, because often they ask questions from these past judgments, and similar questions are being asked again, like whether the MGT 14 is required to be filed, right, for the resolution which you pass in section 230. So answer is no, right? And then the regional director says that the object clause is not same. So all those sort of questions are important from the exam perspective. If you have gone through the PYQ session, well and good. If not, if you have a scanner, just go and check that, or you can also check the PYQ session. The same type of questions have been asked again and again. Then you have section 235, which deals with the acquisition of a company by another company. Acquisition of one company by another, that is under section 235, and that happens by way of a scheme, or it happens by way of a contract. Then you have section 236, which deals with the purchase of the minority shareholding. This is more like a compulsory takeover. You have to give the open offer. Section 237 is also there, power of the central government to provide for amalgamation in the public interests, and then registration. So section 238 is read with section 235, and 239 to 40 is the miscellaneous part. So we'll have all these things covered in this particular session, primarily from section 230 to section 238 along with the rules. So when it comes to the compromise and arrangement, we remember that compromise, dispute, arrangement, there is no dispute, and this is also given in the explanation, and amalgamation is given in the explanation of section 232. One thing I would strongly recommend, that wherever any word is defined, either in section 2 or by way of an explanation to a section, try to remember those points. Like amalgamation. Amalgamation is not defined anywhere, but it is defined by way of an explanation under section 232. So when you write an answer, what is amalgamation? Just understand that if you write that amalgamation is not defined in section 2 of the Companies Act, but it has been defined by way of an explanation under section 232. So that again all the way enhances the level of your answer. And further you can also explain that amalgamation is defined in the Income Tax Act. Similarly, with respect to the arrangement, so arrangement is not defined anywhere, but it is provided in the explanation of section 230, and then that's where you can explain the particular word. So just these short points, what you can do is basically make a note of it. Okay, make a separate note of it. Same way like how we covered reverse merger yesterday, that reverse merger. So reverse merger is not defined anywhere. There is no term called as reverse merger. But in case of reverse merger, this happens. So just remember when these, so how we say those cliche dialogues. Okay, so some of the cliche dialogues, and here if you say some of the cliche sections, subsections, explanations, definitions, just make a note of it, that in case you get an opportunity to write an answer and present those words in the exam, you would definitely do that. So this is again definitely going to help you to improve your exam presentation. So the compromise and arrangement can take place between the company and the creditor or class of creditor, member or class of the members. And then we discussed that this is the power, this is a statutory right which has been given to the company, and the company need not have a power in the memorandum. Sorry, company need not have such power in the memorandum of association, because the power is inherent given to the company under the Companies Act, because the section 230, the heading of the section is basically the power to compromise. Therefore, the power has been already given. It's the statutory right of the company to enter into compromise or arrangement by following the due process which is given in the Companies Act, that's section 230. So this is one question which you can expect in your exam, they may ask you. Further, we while studying this, we discussed that creditor is not defined anywhere. So creditors was any person who is having a claim against the company, and as per IBC, the creditors are financial or the operational creditors, that has been defined there. And otherwise, if you see secured, unsecured, preferential, so this I don't think that by you need to go to this extent, or there would be any question where they would ask you whether creditor is defined anywhere or not. This is we discussed because, like I mentioned, that while we were preparing for these exams, like at that point of time, we were not just preparing for the exam, we were also understanding the law. So that's why our discussions were that deep. But from now exam perspective, I don't think so you need to get into these deep this deep. And if at all you get a question that power to enter into compromise or arrangement, whether it is the power or it is not, and let's say it's a 5-mark question, then in that case what you can do, of course, the answer would be very small. If it's a 3-mark question, then there is no problem. You can straight away write. But if it's a 5-mark question, then what you can do is basically start defining the word compromise, arrangement, creditor, member, and then class. So this way you will overall expand the answer. So that way it will be helpful. Otherwise, if it's a 3-mark question, just restrict your answer to this much content, that no, it's the inherent right of the company to enter into compromise or arrangement. Then we had discussed about the different class of creditors, the class of members, and what constitutes as class. So all these things we had covered. Now, to enter into compromise or arrangement, what would be the steps? The application has to be made to the NCLT, which will be made by the company, creditor, member, or in case the company is entered into liquidation, it will be done by the liquidator. And then NCLT is going to order for the class meeting, right? And then in the class meeting, you'll have the companies. Okay, in the class meeting, you'll have the members and the creditors, and the resolutions would be passed. Thereafter, you'll also have to sent the notice to all the members, creditors, and the debenture holders individually, right? Along with the notice, and you have to disclose, you have to give the complete disclosures with respect to the compromise and arrangement, and also the valuation report has to be submitted. This will also be published in the 2 newspapers, English and the vernacular language. Also, this notice will also be given to the regulatory authorities, that is the regional director, income tax authority, Reserve Bank of India, SEBI, ROC, and all other sectoral regulators. And in case they have any representation, they have 30 days time period within 30 days, if they have any representation, they would make it to the NCLT. Otherwise, it will be presumed that they have no observation. Also, this is one question that in the meeting, who has the right to raise objection, or any person who can raise the objection. So remember, this is the important question. If you are, you can also do one more thing. While you sit for these lectures, or while you're listening to these lectures, keep a notebook and a pen ready, so that I can just tell you that these questions are important, so you can at least make a note of it. But again, I'm saying that important doesn't mean that others are not important. All are equally important, but yes, these are some of the points which you should actually put more emphasis on, and you can expect them in the exam. So who all can raise objections? So the person who is holding the, now just remember, here the word is not member, here the word is any person. Okay, so a person holding the shares of 10% or more, and then a person having an outstanding debt of 5% or more of the total debts can raise objection. Don't write the word member here. uh, you may lose marks, right? So like I had mentioned that time also, that it can be asked for 3 marks. Then how the voting would be done, either in person, via proxy, or through postal ballot. So this is there. Thereafter, in the meeting, how the resolutions would be passed. So we will pass an extraordinary resolution, and this is neither an ordinary resolution nor a special resolution. It requires majority in number and 3/4 in value. This can again be one of the questions, that the resolution passed in the meeting is neither an ordinary resolution nor an special resolution. So comment. So in that case, explain this. Even if it's a 3-mark question, okay, even if it's a 3-mark question, do the numerical. If you remember, at the end of section 240, when we did the case studies and all, we did this numerical also. Just make a numerical that, let's say there are 1 lakh members in the company, and these 1 lakh members hold, let's presume, 8 lakh shares. Okay, and now just make more than 50%. So 50,001 members, 3/4 of this 8 lakh, that is 6 lakh rupees, you are going to put it in the value. So if for more than 50,000 members, they vote in favor of the resolution, and their consolidated holding is 6 lakh and above, then in that case the company can, uh, basically the resolution is approved. Otherwise it is not approved. Now understand, the resolution is approved by the members and the creditors, and thereafter it will be sanctioned by the tribunal. Only then it will become binding. Now, is the approval of the scheme deemed approval, or is it binding on the tribunal to sanction? Answer is no. Sanction can again, is it's again totally depends on the tribunal, whether tribunal wants to sanction the scheme or not. So even if the members have approved the scheme, it is not deemed sanction by the tribunal. Once NCLT approves, then it becomes binding, and it becomes binding on all the members, dissenting members also, right? So this example. So please make such a dummy example and then write it in the exam, very clearly demonstrate. Believe me, this will enhance your overall quality of answer in the exam. Thereafter, we had seen that if there is a conversion of, so before sanctioning, the NCLT is going to again take into consideration certain factors, that the outstanding preference shares, if the preference shares are to be converted into equity, then the outstanding preference dividend, they will have the option, or company would ensure that, the NCLT would ensure that the company gives the option to the preference shareholders that their preference dividend, outstanding preference dividend, is paid by way of cash, or they are converted into equity at the option of the preference shareholders. Protection of the class of the creditors, and then if there is any variation in the rights of the shareholder, so the provisions of section 48 is governed. And anyway, you know that the scheme cannot be a tool to circumvent any provision of the Companies Act or any other law. It cannot be a tool to evade the provision. So a buyback is a classic example, that you cannot have a buyback of more than 25%, or you do a buyback which results in a debt equity ratio exceeding 2:1, or let's say two buybacks, or basically the two buybacks between, within a gap of 12 months. You cannot do all those things, because again section 230 cannot become a tool to circumvent the provisions of the act. Therefore, it has been given here. And then the SICA is OTOs now. Now, exit opportunity will be given by the company. NCLT will ensure that the dissenting shareholders, they get the exit opportunity. Now, no compromise and arrangement will be approved until unless the auditor gives a certificate that the accounting treatment would be as per the accounting standards given in the Companies Act. However, as of now, there is no accounting standard prescribed for compromise or for arrangement. Thereafter, dispensing of the meeting of the creditors and members. So for members, it cannot be done. For creditors, it can be done. But like I had mentioned while I was teaching this also, certain NCLT orders have been passed where the meeting of the members have been dispensed. Such companies were closely held and unconditional approval was given in such cases. Therefore, uh, NCLTs have done, but otherwise, as per section 230, subsection 9, the meeting of the creditors cannot, the members cannot be disposed of. However, the meeting of the creditors have been disposed of, or it can be disposed of if the creditors representing 90% in value, they agree by way of an affidavit. This is that buyback provision that I just gave, that it cannot be used to circumvent the provisions of the buyback. Now, if there is any compromise or arrangement which includes a takeover, so in that case, you'll have to comply with the takeover regulation. So pursuant to the scheme of the compromise and arrangement, you cannot circumvent or you cannot evade any of the provisions. So just imagine if you get a question in the exam that various powers have been given or wide powers have been given to the NCLT or to the tribunal under section 230 with respect to the compromise and arrangement. However, then you may get there are some restrictions, or it cannot become a tool, or section 230 cannot become a tool and all. So there you are going to write all these points that I have just given to you here. Then any aggrieved party can make an application with respect to the tribunal for the with respect to the takeover of the company, and also that the provisions of section 66 will not apply in case the company is doing reduction of share capital. However, if the company does buyback, then the provisions of section 68 has to be respected, have to be complied with. So who can file the application? Then liquidator has the exclusive right. And then also we discussed that if there are two companies who are coming together with the scheme, and that is particularly a scheme of merger or amalgamation, then yes, joint applications can be filed. Now, arrangement and restructuring. So arrangement has been explained. Corporate debt restructuring has been explained in section 230, subsection 2, clause C. So the preconditions of corporate debt restructuring, this is there. Just remember these 6 points, the basic points. What is the requisite majority? It's the majority number and the 3/4 in value. Thereafter, we did this case in point. Dispensing of the meeting of the creditors, dispensing of the meeting of the members. So like I mentioned, that this can be one of the tricky point. Thereafter, buyback, I've just discussed. Objections have been discussed. The three powers of the tribunal: power to supervise the implementation of the scheme, power to make modifications of the scheme in case there is any difficulty to implement the scheme, but the modification power is only for the implementation of the scheme and not for otherwise. And then power to make a winding up order in case the scheme is not able to, or the company is not able to pay the debts once the scheme is being approved. Now, what are the conditions which are precedent and subsequent to the sanctioning of the scheme of arrangement by NCLT? Very, very important. Very, very important for old syllabus students. This is extremely important. Institute has been asking this particular question multiple times, that the proposal should be made in good faith. It should be, the scheme should be fair, reasonable. It should yield smooth, satisfactory working. It should not offend the public and commercial morality. Then it shouldn't be detrimental. It shouldn't violate the provisions of the Companies Act or any other law. And prior certification of the auditor is received with respect to the accounting treatment as per the accounting standards. This particular question, I'm telling you, is again important. You can expect the same in your exam again. Section 232 with respect to the mergers and amalgamation. So here two companies, they make a common arrangement, right? They make a common application for a merger or a company does for demerger. So this is with respect to the merger and the merging companies. Merger can take place by way of absorption, or merger can take place by way of a new company, formation of a new company. So there are two ways with which the merger can take place, and then there is a division of the company. So that's the demerger that has been discussed here. Now valuation has to be done. Okay, and we discussed that whenever such scheme is being prepared, then NCLT, you'll have to prepare the scheme and send it to the NCLT. Thereafter NCLT will again follow the due process of section 230 only. Now what is important in section 232 is basically what are the provisions, right? What are the provisions here? What are the provisions that NCLT would provide for? So NCLT would provide for the appointed date, okay, and the effective date. Now with respect to the appointed date, effective date, there is an amendment that I've already discussed in the class, that the appointed date and the effective date, or basically the appointed date can be a date which can be fixed or tagged along to a particular event, right? Instead of having a fixed date, you can have a fixed event that the day this approval is being received, that would be the appointed date, and accordingly. Now why it is important? Because you do the valuations and the properties and assets and the liabilities gets transferred on the appointed date itself. Then the purchase consideration, right? With respect to the purchase consideration, if there is any contra purchase consideration, that is the treasury stock cross holding, these cross holding treasury stock would be cancelled at the time of payment of the purchase consideration. Again, it is important. Again, this particular point is important. You can make an example. Now don't straight away practice this example in the class, in the exam. What you can do is basically just do a practice beforehand. Okay, beforehand, just try and write an answer, that if you get a question for this, what will you answer in the exam? So just give it a try, share that answer with me on WhatsApp. I will again revert it back that your answer is correct or it requires some changes in terms of the language. Otherwise, conceptually, I know you all are sure. So you can just make a dummy example. If I have made a here, no, I have not made an example here. I don't remember if I had made that in the blank slide, which I used to ask students to take screenshot of. I don't remember if I have done that or not, but what you can do is basically just prepare this, that, you know, treasury stock. So if H Limited has acquired some shares of S Limited, and then that S Limited is getting merged, so you need not pay purchase consideration to yourself. So just remember that you will not pay purchase consideration to yourself. So if you're already holding some shares, if the transferee company is already holding some shares of the transferor company, at the time of the merger, those shares will get cancelled and no purchase consideration would be paid with respect to those shares, because those are already acquired. So you don't need to pay that. Now that will get cancelled. And when those shares are going to be cancelled or extinguished, at that point of time, the provisions of section 66, that is the reduction of share capital, will not apply. Then legal proceedings would be continued by the transferee company as it is. Dissolution without winding up. So again, you can get this question. So if you get this question in the exam, explain what is dissolution without winding up. Comment. So probably it should be a 3-mark question which they will ask you for comment. So just mention that what is the process of winding up, where the petition is filed, liquidator is appointed, assets are sold, liabilities are paid off, and then the NCLT orders for the dissolution of the company. However, in case of a scheme of compromise or arrangement, the transferor company is automatically, or the transferor companies directly dissolved. There is no petition for winding up made, no liquidator is appointed, assets are not sold, liabilities are not paid off. Why? Because the assets and the liabilities and the business of the transferor company automatically gets transferred to the transferee company. Thereafter, the transferor company ceased to exist. Hence, the NCLT orders the dissolution, or NCLT passes the order for dissolution of the transferor company. And exit opportunity will become the liability of the transferee company. To those dissenting shareholders, the exit opportunity has to be given. And then you have, if you are going to issue shares to the non-resident shareholders, then again you have to follow the Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instrument Rules 2019 and comply with the FDI norms, which can be automatic route, approval route, and those sectoral caps will be again applicable. Thereafter, the employment of the transferor company is going to continue. The employees will still continue. The companies straight away do not get listed. Company will have to comply with the provisions of the ICDR, and thereafter it will get listed. So this is what we had covered. Now with respect to the stamp duty, so the stamp duty which is paid by the transferor company. Now this question, theoretically, not the practical one, but the theoretical question has been asked in the exam multiple times. In the old syllabus, it can be expected again in the old syllabus and also in the new syllabus, that the stamp duty which has been paid by the transferor company on its authorized share capital would be allowed to be set off against the capital of the transferee company, um, and no refund would be made. Okay, no refund would be made, but if there is any surplus uh, stamp duty that needs to be paid by the transferee company on account of the mergers and amalgamation, where they have to um increase the authorized share capital to pay the purchase consideration, there it can be set off. Thereafter, with respect to the demerger, this is again the same thing we had covered. Further, omnibus approval, it can be given by the NCLT. So this is the power which has been given to the tribunal here. Then auditor has to confirm that the accounting treatment would be as per the accounting standards, and there are two accounting standards, either AS 14 or NDS 103. So the accounting treatment has to be done accordingly. And then again, the NCLT may order that the fixed assets are made free of charge, right? So these are basic points. Appointed date, effective date. So appointed date is the transfer date. Effective date is the date when the transferor company ceased to exist. That is the day you file the certified copy of the order of the NCLT to the tribunal, to the ROC. And appointed date is going to be the deemed effective date, irrespective whether you file that or not. So this is one part, and thereafter the penal provisions are there. Yes, so till now penal provisions were not asked, but in last to last attempt, in the old syllabus, I remember they had asked this penal provision for five marks, that what would be the penal provision. Now I don't know how worth it is to remember all the penal provisions, because practically it is very difficult to remember all the penal provisions. So if you can do so, well and good. If you cannot do, just remember that 1 lakh, 5 lakh, like these are the common penal provisions which are there. So out of at least 5 marks, you will secure 1 or 2 marks, and I think that's more than sufficient, right? So this is what we had covered in section 232. Now let's go ahead and pick up section 233. Is there anything that you all want me to cover in section 232? Yeah, this part. The order passed by the NCLT is a single clearance window. So all the approvals which are given by the NCLT, you need not comply with the separate provision, but it has to be mentioned in the scheme itself. Only if it is mentioned in the scheme, then it is deemed approved. Otherwise, you'll have to comply with the separate procedure. So you get a lot of questions from this point with respect to these changes, change in the object clause or insertion of the object clause, reduction of share capital, conversion of company, increase in the authorized capital, change of registered office, or whatever, anything. But it has to be mentioned in the scheme itself. And in the scheme, when it is being approved, it gives automatic approval to those all incidental matters. So just check the past year questions. In the past year, they have asked a lot of questions with respect to these provisions and a single clearance window. Generally, it's the regional director who raises the objection that the object clause is not same, or the authorized share capital is not enough, or whatever. Just mention that it has to be mentioned in the scheme itself, and then it's a single clearance window. Appointed date, effective date, I have already discussed. Old syllabus students, you get a lot of times you get this question for 3 marks. New syllabus, again you can get this question for 3 marks, and I'll tell you where you are going to get it, right? If you see, this is the new syllabus question paper. So probably here, somewhere here you are going to get this in this part. Okay, here you are going to get this question. What is appointed date? What is effective date? Okay, then we have judicial pronouncements. So secured, unsecured, this is fine. Now this is one of the judicial pronouncement that you need not file MJT 14 for this. And valuation, with respect to valuation, you will definitely get a question that is valuation going to be challenged by the NCLT? So answer is no, it cannot be challenged at the NCLT because whatever orders have been, the valuations have been done by a registered valuer or by a chartered accountant or by a merchant banker that would be approved or deemed to be approved. Uh, they will not sit over the commercial appeal with respect to the valuations, right? Approval of landlord is again not needed. However, if the lease deed requires, then the approval would be needed. And then you have this common NCLT approval you can take. This we have already covered, that is it the power of the company or they need to have it in the object clause. Commercial wisdom, again one of the most important question from this particular chapter, that will NCLT sit over the commercial wisdom? So answer is no. Even if NCLT believes that there can be a better scheme or they can come up with a better scheme, still NCLT will not sit over the appeal for commercial wisdom. Companies with dissimilar business can also amalgamate. A Section 8 company can also amalgamate with a non-Section 8 company. However, it will lose the license of Section 8 company and all the privileges. Okay, what will happen to the profits of Section 8 company once such Section 8 company merges with a non-Section 8 company? The profits of those Section 8 company would be transferred to some other Section 8 company which is into the same business, right? Just read the Companies Act. What happens when the license of Section 8 company is revoked? Just go back to the executive module, and from if you're from old syllabus, then you can definitely check it from your advanced company law and practice. You'll get the answer that the profits of Section 8 company, the accumulated profits or the reserves undistributed profits of Section 8 company will now be transferred to some other Section 8 company which is into the same business or which is into the same industry. Then we had seen that uh, even if the company is in the winding up process, okay, the liquidation order has been made, still the company can be uh, revived, right? Still the company can be revived in the sense by way of a scheme of a compromise or arrangement. The court or the tribunals are just going to see whether it is in the interest of the company or not. Then companies need not be financially sound. Even a newly incorporated company can amalgamate, right? Can the meeting of the shareholders be dispensed with? Answer is no, only for the creditors. What about the dissenting shareholders? They need to give them, you need to give them the exit opportunity, right? And those dissenting shareholders, uh, the scheme will be binding on them also, and you cannot just change the plan. Indirect interest in the company will not give the power to such person to raise any objection with respect to this. Now, thereafter we did section 234. So till now section 232, is there any doubt? Is there any doubt in section 232 or anything that you have missed which you want me to cover? You can just write it in the comment section and I can take it up. Section 232, 230, 231, 232. Is there anything that you all want me to cover? Case law for reshuffling of object laws. The list of case laws, I will just share it. I'll share the list of those case laws. Okay. The name of the case laws, I'll just share it. If you can remember those case laws, I will, it's good. I'll share the name of those case laws. I think in one of the slide, I have already covered that somewhere down. I'll share that. Okay. Anything else? Anything else with respect to those section 230, 231, 232? Okay, so let's then go ahead with section 234. 234, you will just get a basic question, and there are high probability for both old as well as the new syllabus students that you may get a question. I think in the last attempt also they had asked some question with respect to the um, inbound and outbound merger, either in old syllabus or in new syllabus. Somewhere I had seen that. So you will get this question, the difference between inbound and outbound merger, or you can also get a question that what is this cross-border merger, write a short note on that. Or let's say a company incorporated in India is planning to merge with a company which is incorporated outside India. So what is going to be the process, and accordingly. So here if you see mergers and amalgamations of the company. So again, the jurisdiction is very important, right? This is very, very important. Like I mentioned, rule 25A, the jurisdiction is very important. The jurisdiction to which that foreign company belongs. By the way, here the definition of foreign company also includes a body corporate, irrespective whether it has a place of business in India or not. Then it says that the security market regulator is a signatory to ISCO, or is signatory to the bilateral memorandum of understanding with SEBI, or let's say the central bank is the member of the Bank of International Settlement. And so the company does not belongs to the jurisdiction which is not identified in the public statement of FATF having strategic anti-money laundering measures, or it should not be in the gray list or blacklist in that case. Now you have section 234 that it requires prior RBI approval, and the valuation has to be done. The valuation would be done by Indian registered valuer, or the valuation would be done by internationally accepted principles of accounting and valuation. So that would be there. Cross-border merger regulations, just remember, if you comply the provisions of these regulations, then by default, the RBI approval is deemed to be given, right? Cross-border merger. So sorry. Yeah, the cross-border merger has been defined here. What is cross-border merger? What is inbound? What is outbound merger? And then if you see inbound merger, so you have to comply with the Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instrument Rules 2019. And just remember these 4 points. Comply with the pricing guidelines, entry route, sectoral cap, and the attendant conditions. Okay, so this has to be done. Thereafter, oh, I'm so sorry. Thereafter, the foreign office. Okay, the foreign office. Remember this. Again, this can be one of the exam question, this part. The foreign office of, or the office of that foreign company would be deemed to be the branch office of the Indian company. Okay, this is in case of an inbound merger. So the foreign company, like here I said TCS, if it acquires Apple, then I said that the office of Apple in USA or all other foreign jurisdiction, that would be deemed to be the branch office of TCS abroad, and then accordingly all the regulations which are applicable on the branch office of an Indian company outside India, that would be again applicable to that. These 2 years remittance and all these are fine, right? Same again in case of outbound merger. So you have the limits. So in case of outbound merger, you need to ensure that if it's a resident individual, then it is within the limit liberalized remittance scheme, where the limit is 250,000 US dollar per year. The logic of that branch office is still same, that the Indian company, okay, the Indian company, which is the transferor company to that foreign company, will the office of that company would be treated as the branch office of that foreign company in India, and that all regulations with respect to the branch offices would be applicable on them. Then again, the scheme will be sanctioned by the NCLT. No objection certificate has to be received from the lenders of the Indian company who are in India. So this way they ensure that the debts of the Indian company once acquired by a foreign company doesn't become a bad debt, so they don't run away after taking, merging the company here. So this is all fine, valuation and all this is fine. deemed approval, like I mentioned, that if you comply with these regulations and Rule 25A, RBI deemed approval have been given. Then you have the fast track merger. The definition of small company has changed. So just remember, so when there is two or more small company, or let's say small company and startup and holding company and a wholly owned subsidiary company, no NCLT approval is needed. So what is fast track? What is fast track merger, or what is so fast track about this merger? Here it is basically the companies which merge together need not comply the provisions of section 230 and 232 and go through the NCLT approval. Here the approving authority is the regional director. So what happens in case of a fast track merger? The companies will submit their draft scheme to the official liquidator and also to the ROC. Thereafter, the ROC and the official liquidator, they are going to issue their observations and comments. After that, the meeting will be held of the members and the creditors where the resolution would be passed. Here the resolution is to be passed with 90%. Here it's 90% and 9/10. So once the resolution is now passed, thereafter you will file the approved resolution to the central government, that is the regional director, and after that the central government, if satisfied, is going to approve the scheme. If not satisfied, it is going to forward the scheme and send it to the NCLT, and thereafter the merger would take place through the NCLT route. So this is what is there, and the provisions are same, that once the merger is done, remember this, that the assets of the transferor company becomes the assets of the transferee company. The charges are as usual applicable. So in case of section 232, the charges can be removed. Here the charges remain same. Legal proceedings are same way going to continue. The exit opportunity to be given to the dissenting shareholders becomes the responsibility of the transferee company. No treasury stock and authorized share capital would be allowed to be set off. So provisions and all are exactly same. So that has been given. So holding subsidiary company, two small company, two startup companies, and one startup company and a small company. These are the companies which are covered in section 232. Uh, Thereafter, fast track merger process. This process I have already given here, so you can just go through this. So effect of registration. This is again, I would say, important from your exam perspective, both the cases. Uh, Then you have section 235, and 235 is basically when one company wants to acquire the other company and make that company as its wholly owned subsidiary. So dissenting shareholder. So one is the difference between section 235 and 236. This is very important. So in case of section 235, you are acquiring the shares from the dissenting shareholder, and here the shares are being acquired from the minority shareholder. What should be the pre-holding or the precondition of the, or the condition for pre-holding for section 235? Here it's not needed. Here 90% is needed. Obligations have been discussed, right? Section 235, the obligation is basically once you are entitled, you are bound to acquire. In section 236, you just have to give the offer, and if the offer is accepted, then you are going to acquire. Then the dissenting shareholders have a right to apply to the NCLT that they don't want to give their shares, or they can oppose the scheme, oppose the offer. Here in section 236, the minority shareholder can basically directly approach to those majority shareholder and can ask that the shares should be taken. In case of section 235, the mode is through the scheme or through the contract, and section 236, it's a straight away offer which is accepted, simple, and approved by the majority. Section 235, the scheme has to be approved by majority. What is the majority here? It is 90% in the value, okay, apart from the shares which are already held by the transferee company. And 236, the offer has to be accepted, which has been accepted by the which is made by the acquirer, or basically the majority shareholder, that has to be accepted. Now the shares are acquired by the transferee company. Here there is no individual. However, in section 236, you have acquirer which is again a broad term. There is a circular which is involved. So when we talk about circular, this is section 238. So this circular is involved here, but in case of 236, there is no circular. Notice is given to the shareholders of the transferor company, and here the notice is given only to the company that the dissenting shareholders shares are to be acquired. Now the power has been given to the person, okay, who is now into majority. And how you get into the majority? Basically you come up with a scheme, you offer, right? You come up with a scheme, you offer to all the shareholders of the transferor company. They've used the word transferor company, but it's basically, for your understanding, it's the company whose shares are being acquired. So the transferee company is going to give offer to the shareholders of the transferor company, and within 4 months 90% of the shareholders should agree. If 90% of the shareholders they agree, other than the shares which are already held by the transferee company, then in that case we say the remaining shareholders are the dissenting ones. So who are the dissenting shareholders? One who has expressly said no, or one who has not said anything. Those shareholders are the dissenting shareholders. So while taking the assent of this 90%, you need a positive assent. It's not that when the shareholder is silent, it is deemed acceptance. Then the transferee company is going to make the offer, transfer the shares to the transferor company. Now this transfer can be by way of a scheme, or it can be by way of a contract. uh, Along with this offer which the transferor company, or which the transferee company is going to make, there is going to be a circular under section 238, right? That circular would be submitted, and that circular would contain that how the shares, how the transferee company is going to arrange the cash or the purchase consideration for the payment, plus the recommendations from the transferor company. Thereafter, this circular will be submitted to the ROC for the registration. Once it is submitted for the ROC, to the ROC for the registration, ROC registers it, and after it is registered, only then it is being issued. So this is there. So what is going to be the overall process? The process would be like this. So here section 235 process is given. By the way, again, very, very important from your exam perspective, that how is the uh, uh, takeover of an unlisted company takes place. Be very, very careful what type of company they are mentioning. Are they have they mentioned target company? Are they asking about takeover of a listed company, or they are asking about takeover of an unlisted company? I think June 2019 new syllabus, you had this question. In the PYQ session, I had also asked that why it is a section 235 question and not a section, or not a SAST question, because the one they had used the word dissenting shareholder or something. I don't know if you'll remember that or not. I vaguely remember that this question was there, and it was particularly discussed in the PYQ session. So be very, very careful that that question, if it is being this type of question which is being asked, where they ask you what is going to be the process, you have to be very, very clear on the part what is going to be the step. So first step is that the transferee company is going to make offer to the shareholders of the transferor company, and while they make this offer, a circular would be issued to them under section 238, but this circular has to be registered prior with the ROC. Okay, so I'll just write it here, but prior registered with the ROC. So this is what is given here. The circular has to be registered with the ROC, and then the transferee company is going to wait for 4 months. If within 4 months the offer is accepted by the majority, which is 9/10 in value, then we say that the scheme is being approved by the majority, and thereafter the transferee company gets the right to acquire the shares of the minority shareholders or the dissenting shareholders. If these dissenting shareholders they appeal to NCLT within 1 month, then it's a separate issue. Otherwise, within 2 months, the dissenting shareholders shares would be acquired. If when they appeal to NCLT uh, set aside their appeal, then in that case, their shares would be acquired, and the purchase consideration would be given to the company, right? And then the company is going to pay the purchase consideration to all the shareholders, including the dissenting shareholders. So this is again the step. Transferee company offers to the shareholders of the transferor company. Within 4 months, offer needs to be approved by 9/10 of the value. No, then though you cannot proceed. Yes, then within 2 months you'll send notice to the dissenting shareholders. Dissenting shareholders may appeal to NCLT, and in the meantime, you will acquire those shares and pay the purchase consideration. And every scheme under section 235 will be furnished along with the circular, which will have two things. One is the recommendations of the directors of the target company, or basically the transferor company, and a statement by the transferee company how the necessary cash would be ensured. And this is there in section 235 read with section 238. Next is we have the purchase of the minority shareholding. Now, what do you mean by minority shareholding? Basically, this is less than 10%. The moment acquirer or the majority shareholder, here you have acquirer, the moment acquirer acquires 90%, and this we are talking about an unlisted company. Of course, in case of listed company, the provisions would be applicable here, but then you have the delisting regulations which automatically would ask the company to, or the acquirer to, give the exit opportunity. But in case of an unlisted company, there was no such provision. So the moment the acquirer acquires 90%, he has to give the offer to the minority shareholders of the company, and this offer would be given to the company or via company. The acquirer would give the notice to the company and mention that I am now the registered holder of 90% of the shares of the company, and then he has the intention to acquire the shares of the remaining shareholders, right? Minority shareholders. There is an intention. Thereafter, the acquirer person or a group of person under subsection 1, the valuation would be there, and as per the valuation, like the registered valuer is going to do the valuation as per the valuation, or basically the highest price which is paid by the acquirer is during the last 12 months. This is going to be the price. By the way, I again feel that this can be one of the important question, that what is going to be the value at which the shares would be acquired under section 236 from the minority shareholder. So if it's a listed company, then again takeover regulation. If it's an unlisted company or a private company, then highest price which is paid by the acquirer in the last 12 months, or the fair value which has been calculated by the registered valuer. Here the minority shareholders have also the right that in case the offer is not made by the majority shareholder, the minority shareholder can make the offer and ensure that the majority shareholder actually acquires the shares of the company, right? So this is there, and the company acts like an agent here. On one hand, it receives the money from the acquirer and delivers that money, or gives those or pay those money as a purchase consideration to the minority shareholder. From the minority shareholder, that company takes the shares and delivers it to the, or transfers the shares in the name of the acquirer. So this is the case here. Acquirer definition is same like of a takeover regulation, where any individual, company, body corporate, partnership, limited liability partnership, anything can come into picture when it comes to the definition of acquirer here. uh, Thereafter, this new amendment which was being made, that purchase of minority shares are held in the demat form. So this is just give a reading. I think this is one of the amendment. If you can just give a reading to it. It's a very plain vanilla provision, nothing fancy about it. So just give a basic reading to it. This is the case. Thereafter, you have section 237, where you have the power of the central government to provide for amalgamation in case of public interest. So whenever there is going to be such case, what central government is going to do? Central government will first provide the draft to both the companies, right? So I'll just straight away take you to the chart and it will be helpful. So central government, when it proposes to amalgamate two companies, it is going to forward the order copy or the draft copy to both the transferor and the transferee company. Thereafter, the transferor and the transferee company may suggest for uh, changes or modifications or provide their suggestions to the central government. Thereafter, central government is going to decide the consideration, right, and publish it. If there is any party which is which feels prejudiced due to the consideration which is mentioned, those party can prefer an appeal to the NCLT. NCLT is then going to decide accordingly whether the consideration is sufficient or not. And once the NCLT order is passed, thereafter central government will notify in the official gazette that the company deemed to be merged, and then the order will be laid before both the houses of the parliament. So section 237, you will get a straightforward question like how I've discussed here, that what is going to be the steps under which a central government. Now be very careful, there are two types of question. One is the section 237 where it says that amalgamation of the two companies by government under the order, okay, and then you have amalgamation of the government company. Last to last attempt, I think I had seen few of the certified copy where question was asked amalgamation of the government company and students had written section 237 and they got 0 marks, at least for that particular question. So there are two separate provisions. One is amalgamation by government. Okay, this is amalgamation of the two companies by government, and then you have the amalgamation of a government company. So two separate provisions, don't get clubbed between or mixed between the two, and then this is fine, right? So probably this is where we can end our today's session here. Tomorrow we are going to start with the Competition Act and the accounting aspects of the transaction. With respect to the accounting aspects, okay, with respect to the accounting aspects and Competition Act, so accounting I feel it's covered well, but with respect to the Competition Act, I do feel that especially for the new syllabus students, we have to do some more provisions. So I'll try to cover little bit of Competition Act, because like this question, explain the competition test, appreciable adverse effect on the competition within the relevant market. So this was being asked, okay, this question was being asked for 3 marks. Now though it is not part of, I won't say it is not part of your syllabus, but this is not part of the corporate restructuring per se. This you have already covered in your executive, but this question was asked, and see, it was asked for 3 marks. So if you know what is appreciable adverse effect, that you can write. And so that's the reason I'll cover Competition Act little more in little more detail tomorrow, so that in case such questions are asked, you'll be able to answer those questions. And also it will be helpful for the students who are going to give those multidisciplinary case study for the new syllabus, because there you have Competition Act as one of the elective paper, so that will be helpful. Now see this question, HIJ Entertainment LLP desires to amalgamate and transfer with LMN Exhibitors Limited. So is it permissible? So here it is talking about the amalgamation of a limited liability partnership with a company. So answer is yes, it can merge. Okay. And the same provisions of section 232 would be applicable there, right? So that's it for today. Tomorrow we start with the competition and the merger, right? I hope this was helpful. Today's session was helpful for you all to brush up the provisions of these Companies Act. And Rituparna ji, like how you have mentioned with respect to the cases, probably in these revision series only, I'll take one of the session where I'll pick up all the cases, and I'll pick up all the cases from the new syllabus module instead of the old syllabus module, because in case of new syllabus module, the cases which have been given, those are very good. So we can have one dedicated session. Probably once we are through with part A, we can have one session for this. Rituparnachi has asked one more doubt here, that can tribunal modify the transfer date proposed in the scheme? Yes, uh, tribunal can modify the uh, proposed date, that is the appointed date, can be modified, and shareholders cannot seek amendment in the swap ratio. Swap ratio, once it is, so if the shareholders are not happy, they may not approve the scheme. If the swap ratio is being approved pursuant to that scheme, as per the scheme, if the swap ratio is being approved by the shareholders, then in that case there is no choice left with those dissenting shareholders. The only thing they can get is the exit opportunity. So swap ratio will not be amended neither by the dissenting shareholders nor by the NCLT. With respect to the transfer date, that is the appointed date, yes, NCLT can amend the appointed date. It is allowed. Okay. Can swap ratio be rejected on the ground that the valuation date is later than the appointed date? So usually the appointed date is the date when the assets and liabilities are transferred. The significance of the appointed date is the valuation date. So the swap ratio, now again, the answer to this question cannot be yes or no straight away. The swap ratio is as per the appointed date only, and then if the appointed date is changed, then the valuation may differ, and that's where the swap ratio can be rejected or it can be challenged. The swap ratio can be challenged because everything is done as on a particular date, and that's the appointed date. So the significance of appointed date is for the valuation and for the transfer of the assets and liability. And if that date is changed and that has a significant influence over the valuation, then yes, the swap ratio can be challenged before the tribunal. Make sense? Does this make sense? Right? So just that if the appointed date is changed and there is no impact on the valuation, then in that case, it cannot be challenged. But if the appointed date is changed and it has a significant influence on the valuation of the company, then the swap ratio can be challenged and it can be rejected. Right? So any other question? Any other question with respect to 230, 234? Please do the past year questions of section 230 and 234. At least this chapter, they give lot of repeated questions from section 230, 232. And of late, whatever questions they have asked from section 233, 234, 236, it can be repeated again. And one question, like I mentioned, the difference between 235 and 236, that is important. And with respect to the cases, like I have promised, we will do it from the new syllabus module on any of the day once we are through with part A, right? So that's it for your today's session then. Take care. Bye bye.